A millionaire husband grabbed his pregnant wife's wrist so hard she nearly fell, and no one in that glittering ballroom dared to speak up. For a year, she survived his quiet violence, 365 days, marked like scars in a hidden journal. But what he never knew, what he never even imagined, was who she truly was, and the powerful man waiting in the shadows to claim his daughter. Before we jump into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories reach and connect with amazing viewers like you. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe so you never miss the new story. Now, get comfortable and let's dive into the story. Aaliyah sat alone on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling over a small brown notebook worn soft at the corners. Inside it were 365 tiny ink marks, one for every day she had survived her husband's hidden violence. If you asked her how many days were in a year, she would say 365. But if you asked a woman who lived in fear, she would answer differently. A year held 365 moments of terror, 365 quiet apologies, she whispered to herself. 365 reminders that no one truly knew what happened behind the locked doors of their perfect home. Why would a pregnant black woman sit in the dim glow of a bedside lamp, cataloging each bruise, each pull of her arm, each time his eyes turned cold? Why would she record pain with the same discipline poets use to record beauty? She wrote because no one else saw her. She wrote because no one else believed her. And she wrote because, someday, the truth would matter. Someday someone would read this and understand why her life had fractured long before anyone noticed. Before Sterling Cooper, life had been simple, quiet, humming with the smoky warmth of a jazz bar where she used to sing. She had a voice that could heal strangers, but not herself. Sterling appeared like a promise, tall, polished, dressed in admiration from Forbes to Financial Weekly. He chose her the way powerful men pick rare objects, convinced his gaze alone elevated them. Aaliyah thought she had been chosen out of love. Sterling knew he had chosen her for control. Marriage exposed the truth quickly. What she wore, who she spoke to, whether she sang anymore, Sterling controlled it all. His compliments vanished, replaced by little cuts disguised as comments. "You're lucky I tolerate this," he'd say when she hesitated. Or, "A woman with your background should know better." At first, she thought it was stress. Then she realized it was him. The shift from words to hands was subtle. A sharp squeeze of her wrist when she disagreed. A shove when she moved too slowly. Fingers on her throat, not enough to choke her, just enough to remind her he could. The walls of their home learned to absorb the thud of her falling, the gasp she tried to swallow. Out in public, he called her darling. At home, she learned to make herself smaller. She wasn't sure when she began writing the marks. Maybe it was after the second time he dragged her by the arm. Maybe it was after he told her she imagined things. She needed proof she wasn't losing her mind, so she wrote, 1 mark per day, 1 mark per bruise, 1 mark per insult that left her trembling long after he walked away. The notebook became a witness, quiet and loyal, when she didn't have anyone else. By the end of the first year, every page was filled, 365 marks, a full year of violence disguised as marriage. She flipped to the final page and stared at the shaky line she had written earlier that day. "If there is one more mark, I won't live long enough to write it." Her breath caught as the bedroom door creaked open. Sterling stepped inside, the faint smell of cologne wafting toward her. She snapped the notebook shut and shoved it beneath the pillow just as he crossed the threshold. His shadow stretched long across the floor. She felt her heartbeat thud against her ribs. He didn't know what she hid. He didn't know how close she was to breaking. And he certainly didn't know that before the year ended, he would nearly take the child growing inside her. People said pregnant women needed tenderness, softness, care. Aaliyah learned to count something else, the number of hits, pushes, and jolts that echoed through her body each week. The day she found out she was expecting, she clutched the test to her chest and whispered a fragile wish maybe this would change him. Maybe the idea of becoming a father would quiet the storms inside him. She held that hope for all of 5 days. Sterling didn't soften. He hardened. He said pregnancy made her slow, said she embarrassed him when she needed to rest, said she should walk faster, eat less, speak only when spoken to. She felt herself shrinking, curling inward around the tiny heartbeat inside her, trying to protect what little piece of life still belonged to her alone. The violence changed shape, but not frequency. He shoved her shoulder when she didn't move quickly enough. He slapped her cheek with the back of his hand when she asked a question he didn't like. Sometimes he threw objects across the room, not at her, but close enough that she felt the air shift as they flew past. He never touched her stomach, not out of mercy, but calculation. Bruises on her arms could be hidden. Bruises on her belly could not. After each outburst came tears his, not hers. He'd kneel beside her, apologize, swear he was tired, stressed, misunderstood. He brought flowers, expensive handbags, jewelry she never wore. Every time she wanted to believe him, every time she felt a cold certainty settled deeper into her bones. Loneliness was its own kind of violence. She had no mother to call, no relatives to seek comfort from, no father she had ever known. Only her voice and the notebook remained untouched. Sometimes she hummed lullabies to the child inside her, pretending the melody could drown out the fear tightening her chest. One evening, Sterling arrived home holding an embossed white envelope. "We're attending the charity gala at the Waldorf Astoria," he announced, "and you're coming with me. Pregnant or not, you represent my image. Aiwa." She stared at her reflection later that night at the soft swell of her belly, at the girl who once dreamed of singing, at the woman who now tiptoed through her own home. She placed a hand over her child and whispered, "I didn't know it yet, but that night, that gala, it would change everything. If there was ever a moment I wished I could disappear from the world, it was the moment Sterling tightened his grip around my wrist under the dazzling lights of the Waldorf Astoria. The pressure of his fingers bit into my skin while cameras flashed and guests floated by with champagne and laughter. No one knew that beneath his perfect smile, he was squeezing me hard enough to make my knees wobble, and no one dared look long enough to question it. The ballroom glowed with chandeliers that looked like falling stars. Jazz music drifted through the air, warm and effortless, as if life here was made of silk and privilege. I stood in the middle of it all, 7 months pregnant, wrapped in a dress Sterling had chosen, feeling like someone had dragged me into a world where I did not belong. I had once dreamed of singing in places like this, not standing silent behind a man who pretended I didn't exist. Sterling entered the gala with Madison Fox on his arm, greeting donors and investors with confident nods, introducing her as if she were an honored guest. I walked a few steps behind them, a shadow he refused to acknowledge. People glanced at me with a strange mix of pity and fear, the kind you give someone you want to help, but are too frightened to stand beside. They'd all seen Sterling's temper before. They knew better than to interfere. My back ached. My feet throbbed. When a server passed by with a tray of drinks, Sterling snapped his fingers at me to take one. My hand trembled the moment I lifted the glass. Only a few drops slipped over the rim, landing on the crisp white sleeve of his suit. But that was enough. His jaw tightened. His hand latched around my wrist as if I had committed a crime. He pulled me toward a shadowed corner behind a column, the music still swaying around us as if the world hadn't shifted into terror. "You can't even hold a glass properly?" he whispered, each word dripping with disgust. His fingers squeezed until I winced. Then he flicked my hand away like dust he couldn't stand touching. When a couple nearby looked over, Sterling offered them a cold smile, daring them to speak. They didn't. Somewhere nearby, a young waiter froze, his phone still recording a video meant to capture the beauty of the gala. Instead, it captured Sterling jerking my wrist, pushing me aside, and my quiet attempt to steady myself. I didn't know the moment was being filmed. I didn't know the world would soon see what I'd hidden for a year. Sterling snapped his fingers at his security detail, nodding toward me as if dismissing a misbehaving pet. "Take her home," he ordered. "I'm not letting her ruin tonight." The guards escorted me out the back entrance. I held my belly with both hands, whispering to my child, "I'm sorry, baby. I'm trying." The car ride home blurred in the dark, the city lights stretching like painful memories across the window. Sterling returned to the ballroom moments after sending me away, slipping his arm through Madison's as if nothing had happened. He laughed, posed for photographs, enjoyed his night. Meanwhile, I sat in the quiet back seat, my heart pounding against the life growing inside me. "I'll protect you," I whispered, voice shaking. "I promise, if I get the chance." When the chauffeur opened the door to the mansion, the house loomed ahead in pitch-black silence. The front door creaked open into darkness. I stepped inside, unaware that this night, the night that began with spilled wine, would lead to the most violent moment of my life. Sterling didn't beat me because I spilled wine. He beat me because the world had finally started looking at him. The moment he returned from the gala, he wasn't just angry, he was terrified. The first rumor about the leaked video had already surfaced online, a whisper turning into a spark. He stormed through the front door with the scent of whiskey on his breath, his eyes darting like a man watching his empire crumble. I stayed in the living room, silent, hoping he would ignore me. But fear has a way of seeking the easiest target, and I was the only one in the room. He cornered me before I could stand. "Do you know what you did to me tonight?" he roared, spit hitting my cheek. "Do you know how you made me look?" I tried to speak, but my voice barely formed a word. He didn't wait. His palm struck my shoulder, sending a sharp jolt down my arm. He grabbed a fistful of my hair and yanked me backward, forcing my head to snap. His hand collided with my cheek again and again, quick, stinging blows that rattled through my skull. When I lifted my arms to protect myself, his foot struck my shin, a swift kick that pulled a cry from my throat. "Stop, please," I gasped, shielding my belly with both hands. But he was somewhere beyond reason, beyond the man he pretended to be. He pulled me by the arm so forcefully that my feet slipped on the polished floor, and I fell hard onto the marble tiles. Pain shot through my shoulder as I hit the ground, breath knocking out of me entirely. The room spun. My vision flickered, then narrowed. What I didn't know was that Rosa Winfrey, the housekeeper who had quit months earlier out of fear, had left more than memories behind. She had hidden cameras in the living room and hallway, tiny devices Sterling had never noticed. And those cameras captured every moment, every shove, every slap, every cruel word as clear as daylight. I tried to crawl backward, but my body wouldn't obey. He towered over me, panting, eyes wild. Then everything blurred. A ringing filled my ears. My limbs felt distant, heavy. The last thing I saw was Sterling's expression shifting not to regret, but to panic. "Aaliyah?" he muttered. "Aaliyah." Acted. I collapsed. Moments later, my consciousness slipped in and out as strangers' voices echoed around me. Paramedics, flashing red lights, cold air on my skin. Sterling hovered behind them, shouting, "She fell in the bathroom. She slipped. Please, help her." I felt nothing but the faint, fluttering movement in my belly. My child was still alive. That was all that mattered. As they lifted me onto the stretcher, a warm drop slid from the corner of my lips, a thin line of blood trailing down my chin. One paramedic looked at Sterling with suspicion but said nothing. He had seen lies like this before. Neighbors leaned out their doors as the ambulance pulled away. One whispered to another, "That's the second time this month emergency services have been there." Behind us, the mansion loomed dark and silent, but the world outside was waking up. That small video clip from the gala started to spread faster than either of us knew. No one realized that this night, the night of bruises, lies, and half-whispered panic, would ignite the truth. Aaliyah had been searching for her entire life. The truth about who she really was, and the father she never knew was watching. Aaliyah lay motionless on the emergency bed, her body strapped with fetal monitors that beeped anxiously beside her. Doctors and nurses moved around her like a storm of white coats, each step in command charged with urgency. The fluorescent lights carved harsh shadows across her bruised skin. Dr. Coltrane Miles studied her chart, and with just one glance at the pattern of injuries, he knew the story Sterling told was a lie. No one slipped in a bathroom and came out marked like this. Every bruise on her body whispered a truth she hadn't spoken aloud. Every scrape and swelling formed a sentence in a story that had repeated itself far too many times. He examined her arms first, noticing the oval-shaped marks around her wrist fingerprints that had faded and darkened in different shades of purple. Some were days old, some were hours old. Her shoulder carried a bruise shaped like the heel of a hand. Her back showed clusters of old trauma that no new fall could explain. He quietly lifted a camera, documenting each injury, uploading them to a secured folder only he could access. He had seen this pattern before in victims too terrified to speak. He recognized the silence she must have lived in, and he made a silent promise. He would not allow her truth to be buried. The door burst open, and Sterling Cooper walked in wearing a polished suit that didn't match the panic twitching in his jaw. His hair was neatly combed, as if appearance alone could erase what he had done. He approached the doctor with exaggerated concern. "Thank you for helping her," he said softly. "She's clumsy, Pregnant women fall easily. I'd appreciate it if you kept this private. Dr. Miles raised his head slowly, his stare cutting through the performance. These injuries don't resemble a fall, he said. The words landed like a blade. Sterling stiffened but forced a thin smile, murmuring something about hormones and stress. The doctor didn't entertain it. The tension in the room was thick enough to suffocate. One man was protecting his patient. The other was protecting his reputation. While Sterling attempted to manage the narrative inside the hospital, a very different reality was unfolding online. The waiter from the gala had uploaded a short video, Sterling gripping Aaliyah's wrist, shoving her aside. Annoyance etched across his face while she struggled to regain her balance. Within hours, the clip spread like wildfire. Comment sections lit up with rage, disbelief, and a rising wave of sympathy for the woman in the blue dress. Hashtags began forming, one louder than the rest. Number Justice for Aaliyah. News blogs posted breaking stories. Millionaire Sterling Cooper caught manhandling pregnant wife. The questions mounted as fast as Sterling tried to push them away. When cornered by a reporter in the hospital lobby, he forced a laugh. My wife is emotional. It was a misunderstanding, but the world wasn't convinced. Back inside the hospital room, Aaliyah's eyelids fluttered. Her breath trembled as she rose from the fog of unconsciousness. She saw white lights first, then the beeping monitor, then her own hand resting protectively across her belly. A small kick answered her touch. She exhaled a shaky breath of relief. Doctor, Miles approached her gently. Your baby is strong, he said, but you can't keep living like this. For the first time, she didn't deny anything. Tears rolled quietly down her cheeks, not from fear but from the shock of hearing someone finally say out loud what she had spent a year trying to survive. No excuses, no minimizing, no lies, just truth. Several floors below, a woman in a navy suit stepped out of the elevator, clutching her phone tightly. Angela Kwan had seen the viral clip earlier that evening, but it wasn't the violence that stopped her heart, it was the woman's face. The resemblance had struck her instantly, painfully. She had spent years working with Denzel Ford, one of the most powerful black businessmen in America, and she had once seen a single faded photograph of him in his 20s. The face in that photograph and the face in that video were nearly identical. Angela walked down the hall toward Aaliyah's room, feeling the weight of something life-altering forming in her chest. She knocked softly before stepping inside, her voice gentle but steady. Miss Knowles, she said. My name is Angela. I think I may know something about you, something you deserve to hear. It was the first time a stranger walked into Aaliyah's life, not to hurt her, not to judge her, but to reveal the truth she had never known she was missing. Angela stood inside the dimly lit hospital room, her posture straight, her expression calm but heavy with purpose. She looked at Aaliyah not with pity, but with the kind of recognition that makes the world pause. It was the look of someone who knew a truth too big to keep inside. Have you ever met someone, Angela said softly, and simply known your life was about to change? The question hung in the air like a quiet prophecy. Aaliyah blinked at her, confused but attentive. Angela approached the side of the bed, choosing her words carefully. She asked about her childhood, her mother, the absence of any relatives. Aaliyah shared what little she knew. A mother who worked 2 jobs, no extended family, and a father whose identity had always been a blank space. I never even knew his name, she whispered. My mother never told me. The more Aaliyah spoke, the more certain Angela became. The bone structure, the shape of her eyes, the softness around the jawline that matched another face almost perfectly. Angela asked permission to collect a few strands of hair from the pillow. Aaliyah hesitated, but curiosity outweighed fear. Angela placed the sample into a sealed envelope with a level of care that spoke volumes. Before leaving, Angela told Aaliyah she would return soon with answers. She didn't explain further. She wanted proof before making a claim that could upend someone's identity. The moment she stepped out of the hospital, she headed straight to the address she knew by heart. Rosa Winfrey answered her door with wary eyes. The former housekeeper had left Sterling Cooper's mansion for one reason: fear for her own safety. When Angela explained why she had come, Rosa's face tightened with a mixture of dread and relief. She led Angela inside, retrieved a hard drive, and placed it on the table as though it were a bomb. I recorded everything, Rosa confessed, not to expose him, but to protect myself. And her. Angela played the footage. She watched Sterling shove, slap, yank, degrade. She watched Aaliyah fall. She watched her curl into herself to protect the child inside her. With each minute, Angela's resolve sharpened like steel. The next morning, Angela entered the private office of Denzel Ford. The billionaire looked up from his desk, expecting a routine legal meeting. Instead, Angela placed the DNA report in front of him, followed by the photographs of injuries, and finally, the hard drive. Denzel read the report once, then again. His hands trembled. 99.8%, he whispered. She's mine? Angela nodded, explaining everything she had uncovered her mother's hidden past, the resemblance, the years of silence, and now the violence that nearly killed her. Denzel dropped into his chair, pressing a hand over his mouth. I never knew, he breathed. Her mother never told me. I would have been there. And his voice broke completely. He beat my daughter for a year? Angela didn't speak. She let the truth settle, heavy and merciless. Without another word, Denzel stood and grabbed his coat. Take me to her, he said. The drive to the hospital felt endless. When Denzel stepped into Aaliyah's room, she sat up slightly, startled by the presence of a tall, distinguished man whose eyes shimmered with something rawer than grief. He approached slowly, afraid to frighten her. Aaliyah, he said, voice barely holding together. I'm your father. She stared at him, confused, disoriented. My father? She echoed, the words too surreal to believe. He nodded, tears welling. I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know, and I am so sorry. Something inside her cracked not in pain, but in release. For the first time in her life, someone was apologizing for abandoning her, even if unintentionally. Someone was claiming her. Someone was choosing her. Denzel took her hand gently, the way no one ever had. I'm here now, he whispered, and no one will ever hurt you again. Minutes later, Jordan Reeves and investigator Noah Chan arrived. Angela spread out the evidence across a small table: videos, medical records, financial data. Noah explained that Sterling had a trail of suspicious transactions, offshore transfers, and falsified documents, enough to bury him far beyond the charges of assault. Denzel looked at each person in the room with a fire newly lit in his eyes. He hurt my daughter for 365 days, he said. Now we end him. Outside, the city moved unaware of the war that had just begun. Sterling Cooper had no idea who Aaliyah truly was, but he was about to learn what it costs to lay a hand on a Ford. Denzel Ford sat at the head of the long conference table, the morning light cutting sharp edges across his face. His voice held no tremor, no hesitation, only the cold, calculated fury of a father who had discovered the unthinkable. He beat my daughter for 365 days, he said. Now it's our turn. The room fell silent. It was no longer a family crisis. It was a full-scale war between two of the most influential forces in the country. Angela, Jordan, and Noah took their seats, each carrying folders thick with evidence. Angela began by laying out the material she had meticulously verified: the video from the gala, the hidden camera footage from the mansion, the medical photographs documented by Dr. Miles, and the scanned pages of the notebook, each ink mark representing a day of suffering. Jordan watched the video, his fists tightening, his throat constricting as Aaliyah stumbled under Sterling's grip. A whole year, he whispered. He did this for a whole year, and no one knew? Noah opened his laptop and projected the financial web he had begun unraveling. Lines of transactions snaked across the screen, connecting Sterling's accounts to offshore companies, shell entities, falsified invoices, and illegal transfers. This isn't just abuse, Noah said. It's money laundering, tax evasion, and fraud. We can hit him legally from every angle. Denzel nodded once. Then we do both. The world will see what he did to my daughter, and the government will see what he did with his money. His tone left no room for debate. 2 attacks, launched simultaneously, one emotional, one prosecutorial, a strategy designed not for revenge, but for obliteration. Within hours, the first wave began. Angela authorized the release of the full gala video to a leading national news outlet. The clip aired on the evening broadcast, Sterling wrenching Aaliyah's wrist, shoving her aside while she steadied her pregnant belly. Millionaire Sterling Cooper behaves aggressively toward expectant wife, the headline read. The internet erupted faster than Sterling could control. Comments flooded social media. Influential figures began demanding an investigation. Hashtags surged to thousands, then millions. Justice for Aaliyah trended across platforms. Even Madison Fox, once proud to walk beside Sterling, was now hiding from paparazzi, terrified of being branded complicit. Cornered by growing outrage, Sterling held a press conference. Cameras clicked in rapid bursts as he stepped up to the podium, wearing the same carefully curated charm he had always relied on. "My wife is pregnant," he said with a strained smile. Emotions run high. The video is misleading, but his voice wavered at the edges, and the public recognized the desperation beneath the facade. The injuries on Aaliyah's body were too severe, too numerous, too fresh to be dismissed as misunderstanding. Meanwhile, Angela moved quietly behind the scenes. She met privately with a respected investigative journalist, sliding across the table not only the medical report from Dr. Miles but also the first batch of financial documents Noah uncovered. The journalist's expression darkened as he read. "This isn't just domestic violence," he said. "This is criminal enterprise." Angela held his gaze. He could face 20 years. By the end of the night, public support for Sterling evaporated. His sponsors withdrew. His business partners began distancing themselves. His board of directors demanded explanations he could not provide. But the final blow of the day had yet to land. Angela returned to the hospital and entered Denzel's temporary command room with a USB drive in hand. She plugged it into the monitor and pressed play. The hidden camera footage appeared. Sterling's hands slamming Aaliyah onto the floor, her cry muffled by fear, the moment her body collapsed under the strain. Denzel gripped the edge of his chair until his knuckles whitened. His jaw clenched with a rage so contained it trembled through the room. "Tomorrow," he said, each word deliberate. "We release this. No blurring, no cuts. The world will see exactly who he is." In that instant, Sterling Cooper's downfall was no longer a possibility. It became an inevitability, a free fall beginning at dawn. The studio lights hummed softly above her, warm but merciless, illuminating every line of exhaustion etched across her face. Aaliyah sat upright, fingers woven together tightly in her lap. When the camera's red light blinked on, she drew in a slow breath. "For the past year," she began, her voice trembling but steadying with each word, "I lived as if I didn't exist, and I don't have a single reason left to stay silent." The world seemed to hold its breath. Angela had prepared her gently, telling her she didn't need theatrics or tears, only truth. Dr. Miles had reminded her the baby was strong, and Denzel stood behind the camera, hands clasped, eyes soft, silently giving her the strength she had been denied all her life. She felt him there not as a billionaire, not as a public figure, but as a father trying to hold together the pieces he had just found. When the interviewer asked what happened behind closed doors, Aaliyah spoke with the clarity of someone who had survived the storm and now stood in the wreckage, naming every shard. She described the control first, the way Sterling dictated her clothes, her movements, her friends. She described the early insults, the ones that settled into her bones long before the bruises formed. And then she described the violence, the pushes, the slaps, the pulling of her hair, the night she curled around her belly, hoping the blows would stop before he reached the child. 365 days, she said. Every mark in my notebook is real. She paused, eyes glistening, not with vulnerability, but with resolve. Sterling didn't know who my father was, but more importantly, he didn't know who I was. The line hit the studio like a crack of thunder. It hit the internet even harder. Minutes after her interview concluded, Angela released the hidden camera footage to every major news network. The country watched in horrified silence as Sterling's violence played across screens with undeniable clarity. The clip of Aaliyah falling, her hands flying to protect her belly, her body hitting the marble floor became the image that seared into the conscience of millions. Arrest Sterling Cooper surged to the #1 trending topic nationwide. Commentators demanded immediate action. Activists called for his arrest. Ordinary strangers posted messages of solidarity, many sharing their own stories of survival. Inside his penthouse, Sterling watched the broadcast with widening eyes. The moment the footage showed him dragging Aaliyah by the arm, he hurled his whiskey glass at the wall. It shattered, fragments scattering across the floor like the remnants of his carefully crafted life. His phone buzzed relentlessly, sponsors withdrawing, board members resigning, lawyers refusing his calls. The empire he had built on arrogance and intimidation was collapsing beneath him faster than he could comprehend. By contrast, Aaliyah felt something she hadn't felt in years. Space to breathe. Not safety, not yet, but the first hint of it. As she stepped off the studio platform, she told Angela, "I don't want revenge. I just want him to stop hurting people." Angela touched her arm gently. "Then we'll make sure this ends in court." Denzel approached, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. She didn't flinch this time. Instead, she let the warmth settle. "You found your voice today," he said softly. "Now let me fight the rest of this battle." And for the first time, Aaliyah allowed herself to believe him. Hundreds of reporters crowded the steps of the New York Supreme Court, their cameras raised like a wall of blinking eyes. Headlines scrolled across the massive LED screens above the entrance. "The Sterling Cooper Trial America Watches." Flashbulbs burst in rapid pulses as Aaliyah stepped out of the black car, her posture steady, her gaze unwavering. Today, she wasn't here to tell a story. She was here to prove a truth the world could no longer deny. Inside the grand courtroom, every seat was filled. Advocates for domestic violence survivors lined the benches. Journalists whispered into microphones. Citizens who had followed her story for weeks waited, silent and tense. At the back of the room, Denzel Ford sat behind his daughter, a protective presence without saying a word. Presiding over it all was Judge Morgan Eastwood, whose calm authority made the room settle instantly. Angela rose as the prosecution began. Her voice carried across the chamber, controlled, sharp, and piercing. "This is not a case about a single night," she declared. "It is about 365 acts of violence stretched across 1 year." She outlined each charge systematically. Physical abuse, psychological coercion, concealment of injury, obstruction, witness intimidation, and financial misconduct involving offshore accounts. With every accusation, Sterling seemed to sink further into his chair. Dr. Coltrane Miles was the first to take the stand. His testimony was clinical and undeniable. He described the overlapping bruises, the fingerprint patterns around Aaliyah's wrist, the shoulder trauma inconsistent with accidental falls. When Angela asked whether these injuries could have been self-inflicted, he answered without hesitation, "No, these are injuries caused by prolonged physical abuse. Period." The gallery fell into a heavy silence. Rosa Winfrey followed, hands trembling but resolve unshaken. She recounted nights of raised voices, the times she saw Aaliyah walk past with long sleeves in summer, the fear that eventually drove her to leave. "I installed the hidden cameras to protect myself," she admitted. "I never imagined they would save her life." Her voice cracked, and several people in the audience wiped tears. Then the lights dimmed, and the video from the hidden cameras played. Gasps rippled through the room as Sterling appeared on the screen, grabbing, shoving, striking, dragging Aaliyah across the floor while she shielded her pregnant belly. The room went still as stone. Even Sterling lowered his gaze, unable to watch the replay of his own brutality. The jury's expressions hardened, their decision already shifting. Sterling's attorney attempted a counterattack, claiming the footage had been manipulated, but a forensic specialist confirmed the video was untouched. When Sterling stood to defend himself, desperation twisted his voice. "She set me up," he insisted. "She wanted to ruin me." The jury recoiled at the statement, the last thin strand of credibility snapping in an instant. Finally, Aaliyah was called to the witness stand. She walked slowly but firmly, taking her place beneath the courtroom lights. She recounted the first time Sterling squeezed her wrist so hard she bruised, the nights she slept in fear, the moment he shoved her at the gala, humiliating her in front of strangers. Her voice wavered only once when she described the night she collapsed under his blows while trying to protect her unborn child. "He didn't know who my father was," she said, "but what he never understood was that I would one day find myself again." The words echoed across the chamber like a verdict of their own. When the testimonies ended, Judge Eastwood announced a 30-minute recess for the jury to deliberate. The tension in the courtroom thickened like fog. Aaliyah sat beside her father, and for the first time, she allowed herself to lean gently against his shoulder. He rested a hand over hers, a silent promise he would never let her stand alone again. The jury returned sooner than expected. The foreperson held a sealed envelope, and the courtroom doors shut behind them. Judge Eastwood lifted the verdict. "The court has reached a decision." 8. The chapter ended there, the entire nation holding its breath. Judge Morgan Eastwood's voice rang clear across the silent courtroom. "The jury finds the defendant, Sterling Cooper, guilty on all counts, including aggravated assault, concealment of injury, witness intimidation, and financial fraud. She paused, letting the weight of the words settle. The sentence: a minimum of 15 years in state prison. Very fast. Sterling collapsed into his chair, his face drained of the confidence he'd once worn like armor. The courtroom erupted not in cheers, but in a profound exhale, the collective release of relief and justice finally served. Aaliyah closed her eyes as tears rolled down her cheeks, not from sorrow, but from the freedom she had waited a year to breathe. The news spread across the country within minutes. Screens lit up with headlines celebrating her victory. Aaliyah Nal's turning pain into justice. Women across the nation shared messages of solidarity. Survivors posted their own stories under hashtags like #StandWithAliyah, #EndAbuse, and #SheSurvived365. Her name became a symbol not of victimhood, but of resilience. Weeks later, Aaliyah felt the first contractions. The hospital room filled with urgency and hope, so different from the fear of her last visit. Denzel stood beside her, gripping her hand as if anchoring her to the world. When the baby's cry finally pierced the air, Aaliyah felt her heart expand beyond anything she had imagined. They placed a tiny, warm body on her chest, and she whispered the name she had chosen long before this moment: Harmony Grace. "Because you," she murmured, "are the harmony I found after all my storms." A year passed. The Waldorf Astoria held its annual charity gala again, but this time the atmosphere thrummed with purpose. When Aaliyah entered the ballroom wearing a soft blue gown and carrying Harmony Grace on her hip, every guest rose to their feet. Applause thundered across the room. Denzel walked beside her, pride radiating from him like a second spotlight. As she stepped onto the stage, the room quieted. She looked out at the sea of faces, strangers, allies, survivors, believers. Her voice was clear, steady. "A year ago, I stood in this hotel, drowning in shame," she began. "Today, I stand as a mother, a daughter, and a survivor." She spoke of rebuilding, of reclaiming her voice, of the community that had lifted her from the shadows. "I didn't survive 365 days of abuse," she said. "I rose from them." Her closing line brought the room to complete stillness. Sometimes, it takes a full year of darkness to find a single day of light. As Minder, far away, in a small prison rec room, Sterling Cooper watched the gala on a muted television. He stared at the screen as Aaliyah smiled down at her daughter, glowing with peace he had never been able to take from her. His shoulders sagged under the realization that he had not lost power, he had never truly held any. Later that night, Aaliyah stepped onto the balcony of the Waldorf Astoria, the city lights shimmering like a new constellation. Harmony Grace slept soundly in her arms. Denzel joined her, resting his hand lightly on her back. "Welcome back to life," he said quietly. She looked out over the skyline, breathing deeply. "I never lost it," she whispered. "I'm just finally living it." The soft blue glow of the city reflected across her face, the color of rebirth, of strength reclaimed, of a future finally hers. When life closes in, and the world feels too heavy, there's still a quiet strength inside us that refuses to disappear. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand attention. It just keeps going, one small step after another, until the darkness finally gives way to something softer, something safe. And often, that tiny step, the one you thought meant nothing, is the one that changes everything. If you're listening to this right now, maybe it's raining outside, or maybe it's late and the world feels unusually quiet. Tell me in the comments where you are and how this story found you. I'd love to hear the moment it reached you. And if you'd like more stories that sit with you, lift you, and remind you you're not alone, make sure to follow the channel. There's always another chapter waiting, one we can walk through together.